The time is 7:15, and campaigners are taking the Scottish Government back to court over the definition of a woman in legislation aimed at improving gender equality on public boards. The group 4Women Scotland won the original case last year, but they aren't happy with the changes the government made as a result. Well, our political correspondent Phil Sim has more on this. Phil, just take us through the background of this.
Sure, it's a slightly tangled history. It starts with the Gender Representation on Public Boards Act of 2018. That was a bill that was passed at Holyrood, which is aimed at promoting equal representation on public sector boards. So basically a 50-50 split of men and women. And the bill included trans women in that. So it said those who were living as a woman and either had or were looking to go through the gender recognition process. And that is what was challenged by this group 4Women Scotland. They took the Scottish Government to court last year, saying that women and trans people have separate protections under the Equality Act, and because of that act is reserved to Westminster, MSPs have to kind of stay in line with it when they're drawing up their own laws. So they lost the initial case, but then they had another one on appeal last year, and they won that one. The judge, Lady Dorian, said that by incorporating people living as women into the definition of woman, the 2018 Act was conflating and confusing two separate and distinct protected characteristics. So after losing the case, the Scottish Government responded by revising the guidance for that bill, saying that specifically when they say a woman, that this also includes trans people with a gender recognition certificate that says they're a woman. And 4Women Scotland are not at all happy about that as a remedy to the case. And that kind of brings us up to this week.
So why is it back in court this week then?
We are basically going to do it all again. It's kind of, if you include the appeal, it's take three. 4Women Scotland say they basically couldn't reopen the original case. So this is a fresh judicial review of the guidance around the bill, challenging the wording. They say they asked the government to change the wording. They said no, so we're going back to court. So, I mean, we know the Scottish Government's position on this topic generally, you know, everything they've said about the rights of women and trans people not clashing. Specifically for the guidance in this bill, it says the bill applies to women as defined in the Equality Act, but that in addition to that, under the terms of the Gender Recognition Act, where someone has a gender recognition certificate that their acquired gender is female, that person's sex is that of a woman. And that's the part that 4Women Scotland are not happy about, that conflation of sex and gender. They say that the Scottish Government are still confusing protected characteristics and are trying to redefine woman. So it essentially boils down, once you get through all of the complicated, you know, technical parliamentary wranglings, it boils down to this row over who you can call a woman and who has that status in law. Lady Haldane's the judge who's going to be tasked to sorting that out, or at least, you know, how it relates to the Scottish Parliament's authority to legislate in terms of this one bill, and that's we're hearing this case for the next 2 days.
And how does it all fit into the wider debate about gender reforms?
Now, as I say, in a direct sense, what this is going to affect is the guidance in the Gender Representation of Public Boards Act. Lady Dorian, the judge in the last case, she was very clear in her judgment. This is just about that one bill. It's not about transgender rights, which are a separate policy entirely. But it is obviously part of this wider and quite wide-ranging and often quite heated debate about gender reform, which is very topical at the moment in Holyrood. MSPs are working on legislation which would make it easier for people to get a gender recognition certificate. That's the way you change your legally recognised gender. And 4Women Scotland believe that this case could have an impact on the debate over that bill, because it kind of focuses in on the distinctions between women, people with GRCs, and indeed trans people without them. If you remember, that was the definition in the first take of this case. You know, the thing is that bill, the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, is going to pass through Parliament, and it may well do that before this case is complete if the judge takes some time to think about it. We know there's a substantial majority behind the bill in Parliament. For all that there was, you know, a few SNP MSPs breaking the whip last time round, it is nailed on that it's going to pass. And, you know, the government's being very careful in how it passes that bill and its wording, because they can see that there's the possibility for legal challenge around this stuff. But I guess the die has been cast in many ways, because it is going to pass through Parliament. It's just that we might have a lot more of this sort of argument outside of Holyrood.
Phil, thank you very much indeed. Our political correspondent, Phil Sim there.
We're talking